The sleek corridors of the Odyssey buzzed with a quiet anticipation as Lucas made his way to the bridge. His fingers grazed the smooth, metallic walls, a habit he developed to stay grounded in the vastness of space. The ship was unlike any he had served on before, where cutting-edge technology blended seamlessly with an almost organic design. As the doors to the bridge hissed open, Lucas's breath caught in his throat. Standing silhouetted against the starry viewport was the most striking alien he had ever seen. Her skin was a mesmerizing shade of emerald, shimmering under the ambient lights. When she turned, her eyes locked onto his, golden and fiery, sparking something primal within him. "You must be the new helmsman," she purred, her voice carrying an otherworldly melody. "I'm Mira, xenobiologist and first officer of the Odyssey." Lucas swallowed hard, trying to compose himself. "Lucas Miller, at your service," he managed, extending his hand. "Though I have to say, your beauty has left me a bit starstruck." Mira's laughter was like the soft chime of wind bells. "Aren't Earthmen forward?" She took his hand, but instead of shaking it, she traced a delicate pattern on his palm. "On my planet, such a greeting is considered quite intimate." Heat rose to Lucas's cheeks. I didn't mean to offend," he stammered. "Oh, you haven't," Mira assured him, a mischievous glint in her eyes. "In fact, I find your species' directness rather refreshing. Shall we begin your tour of the ship?" As they moved through the Odyssey's decks, Lucas found himself constantly aware of Mira's presence. She seemed to have no concept of personal space, brushing against him at every opportunity. In the engine room, she leaned close to explain the intricacies of the warp drive, her breath warm on his ear. In the hydroponics bay, she guided his hand to feel the texture of an alien fruit, her fingers lingering on his. "So, Lucas," Mira said as they entered the mess hall, "tell me about Earth mating rituals. Are they as entertaining as I've heard?" Lucas nearly choked on his coffee. "Well, that's a loaded question," he laughed nervously. "I'm not sure I'm the best authority on the subject." Mira tilted her head, curiosity lighting her expression. "Oh, but surely you've participated in these rituals? A handsome specimen like yourself must have many admirers." I do all right," Lucas stammered, desperately searching for a way to change the subject. "What about your planet? Any interesting customs I should know about?" A sly smile spread across Mira's face. "Oh, many. For instance, did you know that on my world, it's customary to initiate physical contact with potential mates by gently nibbling their earlobes?" Lucas's eyes widened. "You're pulling my leg, right?" Mira's brow furrowed in confusion. "Pulling your leg? Is that an Earth ritual?" Unable to contain himself, Lucas burst into laughter. No, it's just an expression. It means I think you're joking with me." "Ah, I see," Mira replied, her golden eyes twinkling with amusement. "Well, perhaps I'm pulling your leg about the ear nibbling, but I assure you, our mating rituals are far more intense than anything you might find on Earth." The tension between them crackled like static electricity, and Lucas found himself leaning closer, drawn in by Mira's otherworldly allure. "Maybe you could give me a demonstration sometime," he said, surprising himself with his boldness. Mira's lips curved into a seductive smile. "Careful what you wish for, Earthling. You might find yourself in over your head." Before Lucas could respond, an alarm blared through the ship. "Warning, airlock malfunction detected. Emergency protocols engaged." "Damn," Lucas muttered. "We should check that out." They rushed to the nearest airlock, finding the door sealed shut. "The system's gone haywire," Lucas said, examining the control panel. "We need to manually override it from inside." "Both of us?" Mira asked, raising an eyebrow. Lucas nodded. "It's a two-person job, but it'll be tight in there." "I'm sure we'll manage," Mira purred, her eyes raking over Lucas's form. As they squeezed into the airlock, Lucas became acutely aware of every point of contact between their bodies. Mira's skin radiated an alien warmth, and her scent, something like exotic flowers and ozone, filled his senses. "Right," Lucas said, his voice husky. "You take the left panel, I'll take the right. We need to synchronize the override codes." They worked in tandem, fingers flying over the controls, With each passing moment, the air seemed to grow thicker, charged with unspoken desire. As they input the final sequence, their hands brushed, sending a jolt of electricity through Lucas's body. The airlock doors slid open with a hiss, but neither of them moved. They stood frozen, bodies pressed together, breathing heavily. "Well," Mira said softly, her lips mere inches from Lucas's. That was invigorating. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. He knew he should step back, maintain some semblance of professionalism, but every fiber of his being screamed to close the distance between them. "Mira," he breathed. "Bridge to Commander Mira." A voice crackled over the intercom. "Your presence is required for the upcoming mission briefing." The spell broken, they hastily disentangled themselves. Mira smoothed her uniform, a faint purple blush coloring her cheeks. "Duty calls," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "But I look forward to continuing our cultural exchange, Lucas." As she walked away, Lucas leaned against the airlock wall, his head spinning. What had he gotten himself into? And more importantly, how far was he willing to let it go? The rest of Lucas's shift passed in a blur of routine tasks and stolen glances. Every time he and Mira crossed paths, the air seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. He found himself inventing reasons to visit the bridge, just for the chance to bask in her presence. As he lay in his bunk that night, Lucas's mind raced with thoughts of emerald skin and golden eyes. He knew he was playing with fire. Fraternization between crew members was frowned upon, let alone interspecies relationships. But there was something about Mira that made him want to throw caution to the wind. Just as he was drifting off to sleep, his comm unit chimed. A message from Mira flashed across the screen. "Meet me on observation deck 3 at 0200 hours. There's something I want to show you." Lucas's pulse quickened. He knew he should ignore it, maintain some semblance of professionalism. But even as he thought it, he was already reaching for his uniform. The corridors were eerily quiet as Lucas made his way to the observation deck. As the door slid open, his breath caught in his throat. The room was bathed in the soft glow of a nebula, casting everything in shades of purple and blue. And there, silhouetted against the stars, stood Mira. She turned as he entered, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come," she said softly. Lucas swallowed hard. "I probably shouldn't have," he admitted, "but I couldn't stay away." Mira glided towards him, her movements fluid and graceful. "Do you know why I asked you here, Lucas?" He shook his head, not trusting himself to speak. "On my world, we have a saying," Mira continued, stopping mere inches from him. "The stars align, but once in a lifetime. When they do, it's a sin to look away." Before Lucas could process her words, Mira's lips were on his. The kiss was electric, sending shockwaves through his entire body. Her skin was impossibly soft, her scent intoxicating. Lucas's hands found her waist, pulling her closer as the kiss deepened. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless. "Mira," Lucas panted, "we shouldn't." She placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. "Don't think, Lucas. Just feel." As they came together again, all thoughts of propriety and protocol vanished from Lucas's mind. In that moment, there was only Mira, the stars, and the infinite possibilities stretching out before them. Little did they know, their passionate encounter was being observed. In a hidden control room, technicians monitored banks of screens, each displaying different areas of the Odyssey. One of them turned to his colleague, a look of concern on his face. "Things are escalating faster than anticipated between subjects L and M," he said. "Should we intervene?" The other technician shook her head. "No, let it play out. This is exactly the kind of data we need for the interspecies compatibility project. Besides," she added with a smirk, "it's just getting interesting." As the observation deck faded from view, replaced by lines of code and biometric readings, Lucas and Mira remained blissfully unaware of their true circumstances. For them, the universe had shrunk to the size of an observation deck, and the only reality that mattered was the one they were creating together. The gentle hum of the Odyssey's engines pulsed through Lucas's body as he made his way to the bridge, his mind still reeling from the encounter with Mira on the observation deck. Her emerald skin, her intoxicating scent, the electricity of her touch. It all felt surreal, like a dream he was afraid to wake from. As the doors to the bridge slid open, Lucas was met with a burst of activity. Crew members bustled about, preparing for the ship's next mission, but all the noise faded into the background when his eyes found Mira. She stood at the center of the room, her expression composed and professional. But when their gazes locked, Lucas saw the same fire that had ignited between them the night before. He forced himself to focus on his duties, taking his place at the helm. But it was impossible to ignore the tension that crackled between them, a magnetic pull that threatened to unravel them both. The Odyssey's captain, a grizzled veteran with more space miles than anyone else on the ship, noticed the charged atmosphere. He raised an eyebrow as he glanced between Lucas and Mira, but said nothing for now. "Helmsman, plot a course for the Andromeda sector," the captain ordered, his voice gruff but steady. "We've received a distress signal from one of our outposts. Could be nothing, could be something." "Yes, sir," Lucas replied, his voice betraying none of the turmoil roiling within him. As he keyed in the coordinates, Mira moved to stand beside him, her presence a constant distraction. "Are you all right, Lucas?" she asked softly, her voice laced with genuine concern. "You seem tense." Lucas glanced at her, seeing the concern in her golden eyes. "I'm fine," he said, though they both knew it was a lie. "Just trying to focus on the mission." "Of course," Mira murmured, but the way her hand brushed against his arm said everything her words did not. The captain's sharp eyes caught the interaction, and he cleared his throat pointedly. "Commander Mira, a word in private?" She straightened, her expression unreadable. "Of course, Captain." Lucas watched as she followed the captain into his ready room, a knot of anxiety forming in his gut. He knew what was coming. The captain wasn't blind. He had surely noticed the growing tension between them. As the doors closed behind them, Lucas forced himself to focus on his duties, but his mind kept drifting back to that observation deck, to the feel of Mira's lips on his, to the way her body had molded against his. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours before the ready room doors slid open, and Mira emerged, her expression as calm and composed as ever. But when she met Lucas's gaze, there was something else there too, something that made his heart skip a beat. She moved to stand beside him once more, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, in a voice so low only he could hear, she said, "We'll have to be more careful from now on." Lucas nodded, a mixture of relief and disappointment washing over him. He knew she was right, but that didn't make it any easier. "Understood," he replied, his voice just as soft. But as he turned his attention back to the console, he couldn't help but wonder if careful was really what either of them wanted. As the Odyssey hurtled through the vast expanse of space, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that they were on a collision course with something far more dangerous than any interstellar threat, a force that neither of them could hope to control, their own desires. And in the cold, unyielding vacuum of space, that was a danger more perilous than anything they had ever faced. The stars outside the Odyssey's viewport seemed unervingly still, a sharp contrast to the storm of emotions raging inside Lucas. His fingers danced across the helm's controls with practiced precision, but his mind was elsewhere. Back in the observation deck, back to Mira. Her words echoed in his thoughts. "We'll have to be more careful." The captain's warning was implicit in that private conversation, and now every moment felt like walking a tightrope. The Andromeda sector, with its sprawling nebulae and pockets of rogue planets, was a far cry from the relative safety of known space. The distress signal they were responding to had been weak, garbled by the distance, and whatever awaited them there was shrouded in uncertainty. The crew's tension mirrored Lucas's own, though they were unaware of the personal stakes complicating his focus. The captain's voice cut through the silence, low and authoritative. "Helmsman, bring us out of warp." "Aye, sir," Lucas replied, pulling the lever that slowed the ship from faster-than-light speeds. The Odyssey shuddered slightly as it re-entered normal space, the distant stars snapping back into sharp focus. On the main view screen, the sector appeared deceptively peaceful. The rich hues of a distant nebula painted the backdrop, with planets hanging like marbles in the void. But there, amid the cosmic beauty, was the source of the distress signal, a lone outpost, small and isolated, barely noticeable against the grandeur of space. "There it is," the captain murmured, leaning forward in his chair. "Scan for life signs." Mira, now back in her official role as the ship's xenobiologist, moved to the science station. Lucas watched her from the corner of his eye, her focused expression as beautiful as it was intimidating. "Scanning now," she reported, her voice professional, devoid of the intimacy they'd shared only hours ago. The ship's scanners hummed to life, sending out pulses of energy to probe the outpost for signs of life or danger. The bridge crew waited in tense silence as the data streamed in. Mira's brow furrowed, and she glanced up at the captain. "Sir, I'm detecting faint life signs, but they're erratic. It's as if whoever's down there is barely hanging on." The captain nodded grimly. "Prepare a landing party. We need to investigate, but proceed with caution. We don't know what caused this." "I'll lead the team," Mira volunteered, her voice steady, though Lucas could see the determination in her eyes. He admired her bravery, her willingness to step into the unknown, but it also sent a wave of concern crashing over him. The thought of her in danger unsettled him more than it should have. "I'm going too," Lucas said before he could stop himself. The captain looked at him, eyes narrowing slightly. "That's not necessary, helmsman. We need you here in case of an emergency." "With all due respect, Captain, I've got experience with field missions, and if there's a chance the outpost systems need to be restored, you'll want someone who can handle both tech and piloting in a pinch." There was a long pause, during which Lucas could almost feel the captain weighing his options. Finally, he gave a curt nod. "Fine, but I want both of you back here in one piece." "Understood." "Yes, sir," Lucas and Mira responded in unison. As the two of them made their way to the shuttle bay, the tension between them was palpable. Lucas felt like he should say something, anything, to break the ice, but nothing seemed adequate. Mira seemed equally distant, focused on the task at hand. They boarded the shuttle in silence, joined by two other crew members, a medic and a security officer. The small team was well equipped for whatever they might find on the surface. As the shuttle detached from the Odyssey and descended toward the outpost, Lucas's hands moved over the controls with automatic precision. He could feel Mira's presence beside him, a magnetic force that pulled at his concentration. Every breath felt heavier, every glance between them loaded with unspoken words. "Approaching the outpost," Lucas announced, forcing himself to focus on the task at hand. The structure below was a small, dome-shaped facility surrounded by rocky terrain. It looked worn, as if it had been neglected for years despite its relatively recent construction. "I'm not seeing any obvious signs of damage, but the place looks deserted." "Maybe it's something internal," Mira suggested. "A malfunction or a viral outbreak. We need to be prepared for anything." The shuttle touched down on the barren surface with a soft thud, and the team quickly gathered their gear. Lucas could feel the weight of his blaster on his hip, a reminder of the dangers that could be lurking within the outpost's walls. As they disembarked, the chill of the planet's thin atmosphere seeped into his bones, despite his insulated suit. The outpost's entrance loomed before them, its thick metal doors sealed shut. Lucas approached the control panel, brushing a layer of dust from the screen. "Power's low, but it looks like I can manually override the lock. Give me a moment." Mira stood close by, her eyes scanning the surroundings for any sign of movement. The medic and security officer formed a protective circle around her, ready for whatever might emerge from the desolate landscape. With a few deft keystrokes, Lucas activated the door's emergency release. The metal slabs groaned in protest as they slid open, revealing a dark corridor beyond. The air inside was stale, carrying a faint metallic tang that set Lucas's nerves on edge. "Stay alert," Mira instructed, her voice cutting through the quiet like a knife. She activated her suit's built-in flashlight, casting a beam of light down the corridor. The others followed suit, illuminating the passage with cones of light that danced across the walls. The team moved cautiously, each step echoing in the silence. The outpost felt abandoned, but the faint life signs Mira had detected earlier suggested otherwise. They reached a junction where the corridor split into two directions, one leading to the living quarters, the other to the main control room. "Lucas, take the medic and check the control room," Mira said, her tone brooking no argument. "I'll head to the living quarters with the security officer and see if we can locate the source of the life signs." Lucas hesitated, 1,000 concerns flashing through his mind. Splitting up in an unknown environment was a risk, but he trusted Mira's judgment. "Be careful," he urged, his voice betraying the worry he couldn't suppress. "You too," she replied, giving him a brief, meaningful look before heading down the opposite corridor. Lucas watched her disappear into the shadows before turning to the medic. "Let's move. The sooner we get the systems back online, the sooner we can figure out what happened here." The control room was a mess of darkened screens and flickering lights. Lucas quickly assessed the situation, finding the main console barely operational. He knelt down and pried open a panel, exposing a tangle of wires. As he worked to reroute power, his mind kept drifting back to Mira, her calm, steady demeanor in the face of the unknown, her confidence in making decisions that could determine their survival. After several tense minutes, the room's lights flickered to life, and the consoles powered up with a low hum. "There we go," Lucas muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. He turned to the medic. "See if you can access the logs, figure out what went wrong." The medic nodded, taking a seat at the console. As he tapped into the system, Lucas felt a growing unease. Something about this outpost didn't sit right with him. An instinct honed from years of space travel and close encounters with the unknown. "Lucas," the medic called out, his voice tinged with alarm. "You need to see this." Lucas crossed the room and looked at the screen. What he saw made his blood run cold. The log showed that the outpost had experienced a series of power failures, but that wasn't the worst part. There were repeated references to an unknown entity, something that had infiltrated the outpost weeks ago. The final entry was a garbled message, barely intelligible. "It's inside. We can't stop it. If you find this, don't." The message cut off abruptly. A shiver ran down Lucas's spine. "We need to get to Mira," he said, his voice tight with urgency. "Now!" The two men bolted out of the control room and raced down the corridor, their footsteps pounding against the metal floor. As they neared the living quarters, they heard a sound that made Lucas's heart skip a beat. A scream, sharp and terrified, echoing through the outpost. "Mira!" Lucas shouted, his voice raw with fear. They burst into the living quarters to find chaos. The security officer lay unconscious on the floor, his weapon discarded. Mira was backed into a corner, her blaster aimed at something in the shadows, a shifting, amorphous mass that defied comprehension. "Lucas, stay back," she cried, her voice trembling but steady. But Lucas didn't hesitate. He drew his blaster and fired at the creature, the energy bolt tearing through the air. The creature recoiled, its form distorting, but it didn't dissipate. Instead, it surged forward, faster than Lucas could react. In a flash, the creature engulfed Mira, its dark tendrils wrapping around her like a shroud. She gasped, struggling against its grip, but the more she fought, the tighter it held. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest, a cold sweat breaking out across his skin. "No!" he shouted, firing again and again. But the creature absorbed the shots as if they were nothing. Mira's eyes met his, wide with terror, and in that moment, Lucas felt the universe close and around him. He couldn't lose her. Not like this. Not when they had only just begun to realize what they meant to each other. With a surge of adrenaline, Lucas rushed forward, diving into the mass that held Mira captive. He felt the creature's cold, slimy tendrils wrap around him, but he didn't care. All that mattered was getting to her, saving her. "Mira," he shouted, reaching out to her. She grasped his hand, her fingers trembling. The creature's grip tightened, and Lucas felt the air being squeezed from his lungs, but he didn't let go. "I'm not leaving you." Together, they fought against the darkness, their combined strength forcing the creature to loosen its hold. For a moment, Lucas thought they might win, but then the creature let out a shriek, a sound that reverberated through his very bones. It reared back, its form convulsing, before it suddenly released them both, retreating into the shadows with a low, guttural growl. Lucas collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, and Mira fell beside him. They were both shaken, covered in the creature's black, oily residue, but alive. The medic hurried over, checking them for injuries, while the security officer groaned and began to stir. Lucas turned to Mira, his chest heaving. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though her face was pale and her hands still trembled. "I think so," she whispered, her voice hoarse. They locked eyes, the intensity of what had just happened sinking in. The outpost, the mission, even the ship, they all faded into the background. All that mattered in that moment was that they were both still here, still together. But the danger was far from over. The creature was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next move. And Lucas knew that whatever it wasn't finished with him yet. "We need to get back to the Odyssey," he said, his voice firm despite the fear that gnawed at him. "Warn the captain, and figure out what the hell that thing is." Mira nodded, her eyes reflecting the same determination. "And then we destroy it," she said, her voice steady. Lucas helped her to her feet, their hands lingering in each other's grip a moment longer than necessary. As they gathered their gear and prepared to leave the outpost, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that their lives had been irrevocably changed. The danger they faced was real, but so was the bond between them, stronger now, forged in the crucible of fear and survival. And as they stepped back into the shuttle, leaving the haunted outpost behind, Lucas knew one thing for certain. No matter what awaited them in the vast, uncharted reaches of space, he and Mira would face it together. The Odyssey's shuttle bay was eerily quiet as Lucas guided the shuttle back into the docking station. The usual hum of the ship's engines seemed muted, the flickering lights casting long, sinister shadows across the metal walls. Lucas's hands gripped the controls tightly, his mind still reeling from the encounter on the outpost. Beside him, Mira sat in silence, her face a mask of calm, but he knew her well enough to sense the turmoil beneath. As the shuttle landed with a soft thud, the docking clamps hissed into place, securing the small craft. The ramp lowered, and Lucas stood up, his legs still shaky from adrenaline. The rest of the landing party was already unbuckling, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and relief. "We need to get to the bridge," Lucas said, his voice low but urgent. "The captain has to know what happened down there." Mira nodded, her eyes meeting his. "And we need to figure out what that thing was. If it can follow us back here." She didn't finish the thought, but Lucas knew what she was implying. The idea that the creature could infiltrate the Odyssey was too horrifying to fully process. He had seen what it was capable of, how it had nearly consumed both of them. If it got loose on the ship, the entire crew would be at risk. The medic and the security officer fell in behind them as they made their way to the bridge. The corridors of the Odyssey, usually a place of comfort and routine, now felt claustrophobic, the shadows seeming to reach out for them. Every creak, every distant hum, set Lucas on edge. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting the creature to materialize from the darkness. When they reached the bridge, Captain Bennett was already there, standing by the central console with a stern expression. His eyes flicked to Lucas and Mira as they entered, quickly taking in their disheveled appearance and the tension in their eyes. "Report," he ordered, his voice calm but commanding. Lucas stepped forward, his mouth dry. "We found the outpost, but it wasn't abandoned. There was something there, something alive." He hesitated, searching for the right words. "It attacked us? We barely made it out." The captain's eyes narrowed. "Something alive? Can you elaborate?" Mira spoke up, her voice steady despite the horror of what they had witnessed. "It was a creature, sir. An amorphous entity, unlike anything I've seen before. It seemed to be able to change its shape, and it was highly aggressive. It had tried to consume us." A murmur ran through the bridge crew, but the captain remained composed. "Did you manage to gather any data on it? Any idea of what it might be?" "Only what we pulled from the outpost logs," Lucas replied. "They mentioned an unknown entity that infiltrated the facility weeks ago. The last entry was a warning, something about not being able to stop it." The captain's jaw tightened. He turned to the science officer, who had been listening intently. "Lieutenant, I want you to analyze whatever data we have on this creature. I need to know what we're dealing with and how to protect this ship from it." "Aye, sir," the lieutenant responded, already moving to the nearest console. Captain Bennett then looked back at Lucas and Mira, his expression softening slightly. "You both did well to get back here in one piece. But we need to remain on high alert. If this thing poses a threat to the ship, we have to be ready." Lucas nodded, but the captain's words did little to ease the knot of fear in his stomach. "Sir, if this creature followed us, we need to act fast. It could be anywhere by now." "I agree," the captain said. "We'll initiate a ship-wide sweep. Security teams will be on standby, and all non-essential personnel are to remain in their quarters until further notice." The captain's orders were relayed through the ship's communication system, and Lucas could hear the tension in the voices of the crew members who received them. The usual chatter and activity on the bridge quieted as everyone focused on the task at hand. Mira moved to one of the auxiliary stations, bringing up the internal sensors. "We should be able to detect any anomalies in the ship's structure," she said, her fingers flying over the controls. "If that creature is on board, it can't hide forever." Lucas joined her, his eyes scanning the data as it streamed across the screen. Every ping, every blip, sent a jolt of anxiety through him. He couldn't shake the image of that thing, its dark tendrils wrapping around Mira, the terror in her eyes. The need to protect her, to protect everyone on the ship, burned in his chest like a fire. Minutes passed, each one stretching into what felt like an eternity. The ship's scanners swept through every corridor, every room, searching for any sign of the creature. But the longer they searched, the more Lucas's nerves frayed. "I've got something," Mira said suddenly, her voice sharp. Lucas's heart skipped a beat. "Where?" Mira pointed to the screen. "Cargo Bay 4. The sensors are picking up an anomaly, something that doesn't match the normal readings." The captain was at their side in an instant, his eyes narrowing as he studied the data. "It's faint, but it's there. Could be our creature." He straightened, his decision made. "Lucas, Mira, you're with me. We'll take a security team and investigate. Whatever that thing is, we're going to find it and eliminate it before it can do any more damage." Lucas felt a surge of determination, the fear that had gripped him earlier, now fueling his resolve. "Understood, sir," he said, his voice firm. As they prepared to leave the bridge, Lucas exchanged a glance with Mira. There was a silent understanding between them, a shared resolve that needed no words. They had faced the creature once, and they would face it again, together. The security team was waiting for them in the corridor, weapons at the ready. The journey to Cargo Bay 4 was tense, the group moving quickly but cautiously, eyes darting to every corner, every shadow. Lucas's hand hovered over his blaster, his senses heightened. The ship felt too quiet, as if it was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. When they reached the cargo bay, the heavy doors loomed before them, sealed shut. Captain Bennett gestured for the team to take positions, then turned to Lucas and Mira. "Stay sharp. We go in fast and take control of the situation. No unnecessary risks." Lucas and Mira nodded, their eyes locked on the doors as they slid open with a hiss. The cargo bay beyond was dimly lit, filled with stacks of crates and equipment. The air was thick with the scent of metal and machine oil, and a deep, unsettling silence hung over everything. The team moved inside, spreading out to cover more ground. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest, his breath coming in shallow bursts. He scanned the shadows, his blaster raised, ready to fire at the first sign of movement. Mira stayed close, her own weapon drawn, her eyes sharp and focused. "There," she whispered, pointing to a stack of crates near the far wall. The faintest hint of movement caught Lucas's eye, a shifting shadow that shouldn't have been there. The captain raised his hand, signaling the team to advance. They moved in closer, weapons trained on the crates. Lucas could feel the tension in the air, a coiled spring ready to snap. Then, without warning, the creature emerged. It was faster than before, its dark form undulating and expanding as it lunged at them. The security team opened fire, energy bolts lighting up the cargo bay, but the creature seemed to absorb the shots, its mass shifting and writhing. "Fall back!" Captain Bennett shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. The team retreated, but the creature was relentless. It surged forward, tendrils reaching out, grasping for anything they could ensnare. Lucas fired again and again, but the creature was unstoppable, its form growing more chaotic, more monstrous. Suddenly, one of the security officers was caught. The creature's tendrils wrapped around him, lifting him off the ground. He screamed, struggling in vain as the dark mass began to engulf him. "Help him!" Lucas shouted, but before anyone could react, the creature threw the officer across the bay, slamming him into a stack of crates. He crumpled to the ground, motionless. "Get back," the captain ordered, his voice filled with urgency. "We can't fight it here. We need to regroup." The team retreated toward the doors, firing as they went, but the creature was on them, relentless. Lucas could feel the air growing colder, the darkness closing in around them. "Mira, move!" he yelled, grabbing her arm as they stumbled toward the exit. The creature was almost on them, its tendrils reaching out, but they managed to slip through the doors just as they slammed shut behind them. Panting, Lucas and Mira backed away from the sealed entrance, their hearts racing. The rest of the team was with them, their expressions a mix of fear and disbelief. "That thing," one of the security officers gasped. "What is it?" Captain Bennett shook his head, his face grim. "I don't know, but we're not equipped to deal with it. We need to regroup and figure out our next move." Lucas nodded, his mind racing. They had survived, but barely. The creature was still in the cargo bay, and it was only a matter of time before it found a way out. "We can't just leave it there," he said, his voice firm. "We need to find a way to contain it, or destroy it, before it can do any more damage." The captain looked at him, his eyes hard. "Agreed. But we need to be smart about this. Whatever that thing is, it's beyond anything we've encountered before." He turned to the rest of the team. "Get back to the bridge. We need to assess the situation and come up with a plan. And Lucas, Mira, you two stay close. We're going to need all the help we can get." As they made their way back to the bridge, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over him. The creature was still out there, a lurking menace in the shadows. And with each passing moment, the danger grew closer. But as he glanced at Mira, walking beside him, he felt a flicker of hope. They had faced the darkness once, and they would face it again. No matter what horrors awaited them, they would fight, together.